The Centurion Project. Written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 48. At the End of War, Part 2.
And just where is this judgment coming from?
Cadence asked. Eliza's eyes flicked to the pink alicorn, who stared back evenly.
Who really are you?
She continued.
I've heard quite a few stories about the human called Elias Bright, but what authority do you have here that wasn't given to you on a silver platter? What does all of your so-called knowledge on military affairs come from?
Elias felt anger spread through his mind even as a smile appeared on his face. It's quite simple, Princess, Elias replied calmly. I have seen more war and bloodshed in my 19 years of life than Equestria has since its inception. He looked at Celestia and tilted his head. Permission to speak freely, Princess? The white alicorn bit her lip for a moment in thought, then spoke.
I would like to hear your qualifications as well, General. I trust your judgment, but perhaps a bit of history would alleviate all of our worries. You said yourself that you are a historian. Perhaps you can enlighten us on what makes you so experienced at such a young age?
Elias chuckled. Fair enough. He cracked his neck and straightened. Let's start with a simple resume then. My name is Elias William James Bright, also known as Rubrum Aquila, or the Red Eagle. His grin whined slightly. That title was earned for my choice of method of execution for traitors. He clasped his hand behind his back and began to pace back and forth. As for my qualifications, I've spent hundreds of hours researching Greco-Roman culture, specifically their methods of making war. I used this knowledge to recruit, construct, and train one human legion, and now one equestrian one. My human legion, Legio I Americana, won 17 engagements before its total destruction. His smile dipped slightly. Unfortunately, I made a bad call, and my troops were exhausted. The battle was pitched and there was a chance for victory, but a traitor gave the enemy firearms, and my troops were slaughtered. His bad eye twitched as the smell of gunpowder seemed to fill the air. Elias did his best to press quickly, hoping the smell would dissipate. I blood-eagled the traitor for his actions. Elias fell silent for a moment, then straightened, looking back to Cadence. He could see traces of horror in her eyes, but she was still keeping her face in a tight mask. A stark contrast to the elements, who were beginning to stare at him in horror. They had no idea what was coming. I suppose that brings me to my qualifications in killing, Elias continued. I have 7,398 confirmed human kills, 2,046 of which are by firearm, 1,749 of which are from stabbing, 803 of which are by explosive. Elias looked toward the ceiling as he continued his tally. Something like 900 were from booby traps, and about 500 more were from fires. He tilted his head and shrugged. The rest were from miscellaneous means, save for 87, which were blood eagles.
Miscellaneous meaning?
Twilight asked quietly. Elias glanced to the unicorn to find her writing his words down on a scroll. Evidently her scholarly nature outweighed her horror. He nodded to her question. Drownings, beatings, a few more creative methods. I believe I also hanged a few people for thievery. Elias shrugged and looked back to Cadence. I can't remember them all sometimes. The faces of the early ones blur a little. I was at a dark, dangerous crossroad in my life, but suffice to say I got better. And now I only kill the right people. Changelings, as it were. He stopped his pacing for a moment, then looked up at Celestia. She was staring at him with regret in her eyes, but he knew she wouldn't act against him. She knew what he spoke was true, that he had changed substantially, even since he had nearly beaten Whiteshine to death. He had a great deal of restraint, and while their already terrible relationship would take another hit, she would still trust him to do his job, because he was the only one who had the experience. But that was just it. What did they know about his experiences? What did they know about what he was still experiencing? His scars ran deep, and he was a battle-hardened human that had spilled so much blood that the sight of it didn't even concern him. Ponies, on the other hand, ponies would feel killing on a deeper level than him, even if it was less intense. That was the point he needed to make to get them to understand. And luckily, he had a great example. Elias ran a hand across his mouth. Princess, allow me to convince you why the element should stay here by using a hypothetical. Justy's eyes held a trace of nervousness, and her wings fluttered lightly, but she nodded.
I said you were free to speak, General, and if this helps us reach the right decision, I shall endure.
Let's say we bring these ponies on the march to Saddle Arabia, Elias started, and let's pretend that they can perform at the level of your average guard. They stand tall in the face of the enemy, doing their duty to protect those around them. He raised a finger. And let's also pretend that they all managed to survive without so much as a scratch. He smiled and motioned to his bad eye. No ugly scars for them. No physical agony from taking a sword to the guts, or from losing a limb to some lucky sweep of an axe. Nope, not a damn scratch. He clasped his hands behind his back, swaying in place. He felt energy rising in his body. This was going to work. He could feel it. It would finally get anybody to understand what they were walking into. Would get them to understand why he pushed so hard, why he made the sacrifices he did. He just had to ask that all-important question that he struggled with every time he saw his friends in Legion uniforms. Are you prepared to deal with what will follow when they come home after the killing is done? Are you prepared to do for them the absolute worst thing you can do in a war?
Which is?
Dusty asked quietly. He had her, she could tell, and she already likely knew what he was going to say. But Elias didn't care. He was going to make himself very clear. He stood stark still as he asked, Are you prepared for them to survive? The throne fell into a chilling silence. Elias listened to it with pure joy. War was all fun and games on paper. When talking about living and dying, that's where the understanding came in. Nobody wanted to die, not unless they understood. Elias understood better than anyone, and he was already doing his best to prepare for the increase of his burden. He would survive, of course. Nothing he could do would stop it. He just had to do his best to make sure as many of his friends survived as well. The more that lived, the less damage they would face after. One of the elements broke the silence.
Well,
Rarity started, no doubt trying to find her nerve.
I simply don't understand in what world that living could be worse than death.
Elias grinned widely as he glanced back at the white unicorn, so much so that he imagined he looked a bit mad. He was just so unbelievably happy that she had asked such a perfect question. Then allow me to explain, he answered. You see, us humans, we are quite good at war. So good, in fact, that we managed to kill our planet and just about everyone on it. That alone put her in her place. Rarity cringed back, scooting closer to Twilight, who was still taking notes with a look of horrified fascination in her eyes. But, Elias continued, even human minds are designed for the stress of war. We have a dozen names for it. Post-traumatic stress disorder, shell shock, combat fatigue. He shrugged. Take your pick, the name doesn't matter. It's simply what those that have lived through war would become afflicted with after they got back. Elias spread his hands and began pacing again. Now everyone reacts differently, of course. Some only see minor symptoms, but those who aren't mentally prepared for the horrors of war, those who lose all of their close personal friends. He smiled. Let me paint you all a picture. It starts with mild paranoia, Elias said. Your body is so used to being on guard that you can never truly relax, even when you're in a completely safe and comfortable environment. It's understandable given what you've been through. You fought in battles after all, killed other living creatures. He tilted his head. You may jump at a loud noise or two, flinch a bit when things go bump in the night, when somebody calls your name. But in truth, it isn't anything out of the ordinary. Everybody gets scared and surprised occasionally. It's not an issue, really. Elias turned on his heels and paced the other way, glancing up to find all eyes watching his every movement intently. The ponies were hanging on his every word. Then you start becoming a bit more irritable. When someone asks you a question about what happened while you were away, you do your best to shut it down, change the subject. It's better, you think, and try to forget. So you dodge and avoid and keep moving forward. You attribute everything to those nasty dreams you've been having, but those will go away eventually, right? Elias shook his head and continued. But the problem is, they do care, and they notice these little changes. They press and press and press until one day you snap under the pressure. Anger and hate fill your very soul as you unleash a tirade that sets those nosy friends in their place. You want them to make them never bring it up again. You want to make them understand. But the problem is, words are often not enough, and you have no idea how they can truly get it. And that just makes you angrier, Elias said. You drive them away for a time, and after you calm down, you realize you might need some help. You might need at least one person to come to terms with everything that's happened to you. His mind flashed to Luna. What would she think of him if he showed her his journals in their full, ugly glory? He had lied to the ponies. He remembered every single person he killed. He had written down a very accurate logbook, and if she ever saw them... He shuddered and kept pacing. That wasn't going to happen, at least not for a long time. He just had to keep lying to her until they were in a better spot. But you shove away that notion, Elias continued. You don't want to be a burden to anyone. It's better to suffer a little on the inside than to let anyone else share in your pain. They can't take the pain you hold in your heart, so you keep holding and you stay as quiet as possible. You're quicker to anger, but it isn't anything overly concerning yet. Until you start having the real nightmares, he said bluntly. Until you start hearing the screams, tasting the blood in your mouth, having your lungs filled with the stench of death. It's all flashes, violence, blood, dreams made of death and destruction that would make you avoid sleep like you would the plague. He stared at Cadence as he turned around on his heel again. Now you're waking up in the middle of the night and you can't go back to sleep because the nightmares are waiting. As you get more and more exhausted, you realize that all the shadows all around you are growing deeper now. So deep that they can now hide your enemies. So now you're getting more paranoid. Elias took a deep breath before shifting his eyes to stare at the floor. Talking about this was making his own symptoms flare up, but he had to continue. He pressed forward. So you keep pretending you're fine, and you push on, he said. It'll all fade with time, you think. There's no reason for anyone to know about what you're suffering through. Besides, it's just sleep. You'll catch up later. Elias shrugged. But now you're quicker to anger, even getting mad at the little things. It's just a lack of sleep, you say to yourself, but now your enemies are out in daylight, and you see them around every corner and every piece of shade. Even worse, some of your friends are starting to look at you strangely. Your paranoia just gets worse and worse, and most nights you don't sleep at all. He snorted. Like you were getting sleep anyway. But now you're tired, angry, and always paranoid. He continued, counting the symptoms off in his fingers. And by now your friends have started to notice for real. They ask you if you're alright, if you need any help. Of course I'm alright, you answer. He tapped his nose and smiled at the elements. Don't want to be a burden now, do you? But they keep asking, and you get angrier and more isolated, because despite your best efforts, they treat you like the ticking time bomb you are. His voice took on a harsher tone, but Elias knew he was far too gone to consider stopping. You push them away, he spat. It's a lie. Some claim about how you need space, time to think. Well, they listen, and when you're alone, you hear the first whispers. Your friends, when they do see you, are concerned. They tell you that you don't need to act the same, that you aren't like how you used to be. They tell you that you haven't so much as smiled in days, and you can't help it this time and you snap again. Another string of hate and anger, sprinkled with a taste of fear that comes from you. Eli said, "They still don't get it, and now you know for a fact that they never will. But that's what makes you think, maybe these aren't your friends. Maybe your friends are gone, replaced by spies and enemies. All of their so-called concern is designed to make you weak and complacent." Elias took a breath. "Everyone is out to get you, and you can't tell how wrong you are. You're not sleeping at night after all, and you're ever paranoid. You only have two choices now. Trust in what your friends are telling you and accept their help, or go with your gut and isolate yourself for safety. Can't do the former, so you fake it. Try to act better. The shadows are everywhere now, and the enemy is multiplying before your eyes." He tapped his chest. "And the real problem is that the enemy has always been inside. You try to protect the world from yourself while trying to protect yourself from those around you. You don't sleep, you don't eat. You can't turn to your friends because you throw them all away. Who's left to turn to? Your hate turns inward, and suddenly, taking a walk off a pier with a set of concrete shoes doesn't seem like such a bad idea. At least then the nightmares would stop." Elias felt his bad eye twitch as he stopped pacing to stare at the pair of alicorns, who stared with horror back. Saucy's eyes held complete understanding, and though he intended to state it outright, she knew exactly who he was talking about. She understood, just a little, and the nightmares his little speech would cause would be worth it. "At the end of the road you find yourself on, you are alone and dead inside. Your very soul is hollow, and the idea of death stops becoming something you're afraid of simply because you have nothing left to lose. With that acceptance comes the death of your fear, and as long as you can keep pushing, you can do great things until you break. Then it ends." He looked at Twilight, who had tears in her eyes. "That's what you bring back. That's why survival is worse than death. Because at least the dead know the end of war." He paused for a moment to gather his thoughts, then straightened his posture and clasped his hands behind his back. He looked disgusted inside. "Ultimately, the decision is yours. I am but one voice among many, and despite my wealth of personal experience, I am not perfect. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it. Either way, it's on you." Elias raised a finger. "But before you make that decision, I offer you a challenge." He pointed towards the elements. "I want you to look into their eyes and tell them that you don't care if they die. I want you to get off that throne, take off that crown, walk down to your student's level, and tell her that you don't care if she risks losing her soul. That's what killing is. That's what war is. When you kill or bear witness to killing, a piece of your soul is torn out. You die just a little inside. And when you've seen what I've seen, done the things I've done, you start to wonder if you ever had a soul at all." He let his arm fall to his side. "Because I task you, princess, with saying that you hold no value over their lives. I think you know who I'm talking about when I talk about PTSD, and I want you to know that I hold no value over my own life as it currently is. If I die tomorrow, I do so with a smile on my face. The simple truth is that if I can sacrifice myself to save one of my legionaries, I'll take the opportunity in a heartbeat. That's what you want for them." He finished, jabbing a finger at the elements one final time. "That is what will happen if they come on the march. No value in their lives. That's the cost. Take all the time you wish. Talk to who you want to. It's not my choice. If you want my advice, though, keep them well away. They're safer that way." Elias gave her a slight bow. "If that is all, however, I have drills to conduct." Celestia gave him a small nod in return, but she made no sound. Nobody did. Elias held no satisfaction at their silence. He just prayed that they would understand and make the right decision. Without another word, he walked towards the rear of the throne room entrance, quickly shoving the doors open. He made it halfway to the training yard before he heard a sound of someone running after him. Eli stopped and turned, expecting to find a messenger of some kind, but instead found the hallway empty. He frowned slightly and his hand drifted towards his gladius. He knew he had heard something, but... Elias took a deep breath to calm himself. It was just his paranoia spiking up. Talking about it always made it worse. He just needed to get his legion and run drills. They were excellent for keeping his mind occupied. It took every ounce of his willpower not to draw his sword and cut the pink pony's head off when he looked forward to find her sitting before him. Feather had made it halfway out of her sheath before Elias realized who was before him. His heart pounded as he took several calming breaths, doing his best to recover his composure. When he did so, he glared hard at the pink earth pony. "Miss Pie, I don't think startling an experienced killer is such a good idea." She smiled.
Don't worry, Red. I knew you wouldn't hurt me. You're super strong and smart.
She extended her hooves, offering him a small box in a bright green wrapping paper. Elias eyed it nervously, but he did reach out to take hold of it. "What's this?" he asked. Pinkie Pie giggled.
It's your birthday present, silly. When I first saw you, my pinkies had told me that some pony had a birthday coming recently, and now it's telling me that your birthday is in 3 weeks, 2 days, and 3 hours.
That's eerie, Elias thought. She had gotten his birthday down accurately, but he had no idea if the hourly time was right. He hadn't been old enough to care when his parents had died. "And how do you know that?" he asked aloud. Pinkie giggled again.
There's an itch on the inside of my hoof, followed by 3 right blinks and 2 left ones. And that means a birthday's approaching.
Her demeanor changed in an instant, and she looked at him with one of the most genuine expressions he had ever seen as she reached out to touch his hand.
And, Red?
She said quietly.
I'm really sorry. I know it doesn't mean much, especially since we really don't know each other yet, but I am really sorry for everything you've gone through. I promise that things will get better eventually. You just have to keep going, no matter how bad things get.
How bad things get? Elias asked. What does that mean? Her demeanor shifted in an instant again, as she bounced around him and back towards the throne room.
Don't know what you're talking about, Redsy. See you in a few years.
She bounced around the corner, leaving Elias standing in stunned silence, holding a gift-wrap box. To try and get himself moving again, he looked at the tag to find it addressed to him, along with a note that said, "Don't open until your birthday." Elias grunted at the note, then looked back up to the empty hallway. He had no idea what to think about the encounter, and eventually he managed to get his mind back on track. He walked down the hallway towards the training yard, stopping long enough in his office to drop the present off. There we go. I am feeling so much better than I have with the last 2 videos. I definitely think there's a little bit left, but for the most part, it's almost all gone. I'm actually able to do 90% of my voices. Besides trying to figure out how to do a certain voice so it doesn't sound samey with the other ones, typical audio maker stuff. Real quick though, I would like to thank you guys for 300 videos. I can't believe I've made 300 videos, 300 plus. I didn't make a community post for it because I didn't know, but I've made 309 videos now. Gosh, it's insane. It's been about about 2 years since I started doing this. Thank you guys so much for your freaking support. Speaking of which, my Patreon has been extremely generous recently. I don't know what's going on with you guys, but I've had 4 new Patreons this month. I got 2 more to add to this list, and my paper is getting way too short to include all these names. So thank you. My Tier 1 Patreons: Balance, Kindness, Chase Master, Julius, Portal, Hyperlink, Jason, HK4, aka Texture, Nightingame, Megaria, Pony Entertainment, Starlight Blaze, and Rainflicker, and a brand new Tier 1 Tyler Perry. Thank you my Tier 2s: Captain Blue Shadow, Chaotic Mist, The Animated Ghost, DGMX 2000, Elemental Wolf, H1 Wolf, King, Patel 20, Mr. Crazy Deacon, Solar Comment, Mackenzie McCullough, Nocturne, Papa Lennon, Redeemer of Dark Souls, Eclipse, Sword Brother Mordred, Artie Bryant, Riani, Dragonwolf, and a brand new Tier 2, Steel Spark. Thank you to my previous Titan tiers, Dark Guardian, Danish Dash, and Maverick, and a large thank you to my current ones, User 1842 and Silent Titan. You guys are seriously far too kind. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means so much to me. That aside, however, this has been Firehearth. Have a wonderful day,